Good day, my fellow Americans and good people of the world. Today I would like to address you in regards to the present situation. By now, most of you have learned of the actions of the United States military under the direct orders of POTUS 47 to engage in military force against Iran, and has resulted in the leader of that nation expiring, and as a direct result of the actions taken by the United States in consort with Israel. And it is disappointing, to say the least, that America has entered into yet another unnecessary conflict with foreign nations. It detracts from the work that we need to get done here in America. It's not very surprising considering that POTUS 47 is in his final term. He is a lame duck president. And he has found himself a shiny new toy in the form of military power that is unrestrained by the need to ever win an election ever again. And seen as POTUS, the realm of your reign of power is least constrained by your actions involving foreign affairs. And POTUS 47 has made it very clear where his loyalties lie in terms of his relationships with foreign interests in the world. He has chosen to intentionally abandon the United Nations and all of the rules that apply there. He has effectively abandoned NATO and all the rules that apply there. He has chosen to abandon and turn the tables on our many allies, becoming confrontational and aggressive towards them, using the might of the United States government to bully people into a submissive position, given the fact that America is a superpower and does have the capacity to wield that power at the whims of the POTUS in charge at the time. And it is most unfortunate for us all that the current POTUS has decided he wants to play war games and act like children and use our military in a way that is treating them as if they're cannon fodder, warm bodies to fill a position. And now we're in this position where POTUS has drug America into alignments with foreign nations that don't have the superpower capacity or the military might, but they are wealthy, and combining POTUS 47's insatiable greed, it is what is most natural in his inclinations to lean in those people he believes are rich and powerful through their richness, because he sees them as people he can strike a deal with to get something out of. And so he's using the America brand and all of the America resource and might and all the soft power that we've accumulated over the years to negotiate with other countries, and effectively has put America in a position where we're doing the dirty work of nations that couldn't go after their own perceived enemies and adversaries alone. They need some other paid militia to come in to do the dirty work for them, and that's where America has been put on the line by POTUS. And, I will take a moment to speak on the issue of Israel. It's very sad, and it makes my heart very sad to listen to how this nation has fallen from grace, and it's due to their current leadership, and listening to the intentional infliction of harm against other people under the guise of a justification for its own existence, while hypocritically rejecting the existence of other people. Israel has chosen, through its leadership, to delegitimize its own authority, and I remember reading some articles about the youth that are in Israel that are being forced, and the super orthodoxy being forced to fight this series of endless wars, because the only way for the current, power heads in Israel to retain power is through a never-ending wars and conflict. And to listen to how some of the young minds there have been misled and misguided by a government that doesn't have their best interests at heart, doesn't have the best interests of their nation at heart, does not have the best interest of their children's children at heart, doesn't have the best interest of the world at heart, doesn't have the best interest of humanity at heart. And it's really sad to me because, these are people that have so much potential, and they come from such a history of having come from something that was a really, really dark place, and to overcome that, and to be blessed with the sweet relief of this sense of not having to be afraid of your very existence being eradicated by some external force that has decided to isolate you and identify you and target you and do great harm to you. And the fact that they're living in hypocrisy is very sad to me, because these are people that have so much potential to do good and to be good, but they have been led astray and deceived into thinking that violence is the answer, or that in order for them to exist they need to eradicate other people, when the reality is that they would have the legitimacies and the honors of being able to retain their own place of belonging in this world if they didn't have to constantly hold themselves in this position of needing to fight everybody all of the time. And if they just respected other people's sovereignty and respected the lives of others, they could find a way to live in mutualities with one another, and their story would be much, much more happy. You know, their children wouldn't have to grow up in this generational trauma. You know, they wouldn't have to grow up in a situation where their children are likely going to be channeled into some military position to defend, you know, the poor decisions of terrible leadership. And my heart hurts for them. It really does. Just as my heart hurts for the people of Gaza who are being put in this dark and dehumanizing place, because that's what the government of Israel, the current government of Israel, needs in order for them to make the advancements that they want. They need to steal away the life and the possession and the sovereignty and the human dignity away from other people. And so they nullify their own legitimacy in that way. And here the present situation in regards to Iran, POTUS 47 played right into the hands of Netanyahu, who has for a very long time been desperate, so desperate, to go after Iran. And he's pled to, you know, the nations of the world and explained to them that, you know, there's a threat, there's an imminent threat. There was always an imminent threat of, you know, nuclear powers and all of these things. And, you know, it's kind of like the story of, is it the boy who cried wolf? And, you know, he kept saying it and he kept saying it, like, because he thought it was, you know, a good old time to say to all the townspeople, there's a wolf, there's a wolf. And people started believing him less and less. And then finally, when there was a wolf, nobody believed him when he said it. And then the wolf came in and took everybody out. And so the moral of the story is, of course, you know, don't, you know, make false assertions or false claims and expect that people are going to believe you. And the unfortunate thing is that we in America have a POTUS 47 that doesn't make his decisions based off of truth. He doesn't make his decisions based off of fact. He doesn't make his decisions based off of reality. He makes his decisions based off of greed. What's the advantage that he can take, you know, that is going to be most extractive and exploitative, regardless of whether it's moralist, manipulative, mean. He doesn't live by any sense of code of honor. There's no merit to anything to him. Like, the only thing that he merits or warrants as being valued is money and the capacity to retain more and more wealth. And he's consumed by it to the point where his logics are not ever kicking in sensibly. It's just always thinking of that insatiable need for more and more and more. And so when he finds people that play on those notions of fear that he has, that he's never going to have enough, where's he's going to get his next hit, people play him like a fool, and Netanyahu finally got the POTUS that he had always been hoping for. One that he would be able to play on notions of fear and fondle the ego and make all of these grand, fantastic promises. And Trump was all in on it because he wanted to be the man that was making the deal, you know. He didn't care about the devil being in the details. And he's surrounded by a bunch of people that don't have any sense of military strategy. These are, you know, military playing like children. And because of their lack of maturity in terms of really understanding the consequences of their decisions, you know, the Department of Defense is drafting up these plans. I wouldn't even really call them plans. They're like shoot from the hip, nonsensical, you know, like it's understanding how, you know, to use weapons, but not how to wield defense. And that's probably why it was very telling that they relabeled the Department of Defense as the Department of War. They made their intentions very clear. And now here we are in, you know, the pre-days of a military event that will have consequences, and as they begin to unfold, we are going to see many people die. Innocence will be violated. The rule of law internationally is not only being challenged, but it is intentionally by this act by POTUS and Israel's leadership is eroding the global order and intentionally destabilizing it and setting the stage for more conflicts to flare up, so that the powers that be have the perfect storm of, you know, spiraling out of control consequences that they can feel justified to stand before the world to say, now this is what we're going to do. And I believe it's intending to essentially just take over the world in this dominance to which we won't really have any readily available capacity to exit from, because you know, right now we operate off of a system of honors. It's very much an honor system. Like, we honor, respect, appreciate the rule of law. But POTUS doesn't care about the law. And, you know, setting the stage of, you know, stretching the minds of Americans for them to understand what it's going to look like when they are going to be invaded by their own government through the use of force. You know, what happened in Minnesota. And then the you know, stretching of the imagination to dream up the ideals of what a government would look like that doesn't have elections in America. And, you know, speaking on that, and then getting the MAGA, you know, cohort all fired up about it. I really do believe he made a mistake by going after Iran in this moment, but I also understand why he did it, because of the intelligence that is informing his decision making is based off of this sense that exploiting systems and using them to advantage what they perceive as being channels of power And instead of making, logical decisions based off of, a power channel affecting in one way doesn't mean that you can continuously use that power channel in the same way and for it to not cause other consequences. But this is what happens when you have people that don't understand a program and how to read it. It's like, I get it that you don't understand what like an artificial intelligence system is doing. You just see it's doing a thing and it's like, oh, what a neat trick. But it's important to know how the magic works. Otherwise, you're making terrible decisions that have the devastating proclivity of coming back to bite you in the ass. And so we're in this stupid situation, and we're living in the outcome consequences of terrible decision making coming from morons that don't know what they're doing. They have no idea what they're doing, And Lord, please forgive them, for they know not what they do. And so right now, America really is in this pickle, so to speak, where we need to wake up to the reality that POTUS is not going to, as he says, his moral, legitimacies, he has really good morals, and that's all that's stopping him from doing bad things. And it's like he's proven himself. He's a moralist, manipulative, bad actor with nefarious intent, and he can't be trusted. And he has repetitively broken the Constitution and broken various laws, ignored them, abdicated his responsibilities, handed them over to sycophants who are, messing with things that they don't fully understand and ruining stuff for everybody. And it is time to call for impeachment. What I hope Congress will do is come together to realize that we need to stop Trump from harming himself and others, and to put him in ultimate check. Voting on the fact that he needs to be impeached, we can't wait for the next election round to come through. We need Republicans to wake up to the reality that there will be no America unless you step up and do the right thing right now in the right way for the right reasons. Trump is out of control, and so is his administration. And I understand that impeaching him does not remove everybody else. That's why you need to impeach his entire administration. And I do recognize and understand that that's going to leave us with J.D. Vance, who is himself a bad actor with nefarious intent. And I do believe that he does not have the best interests of America at heart. And I do believe that he has cozied up in the same way that Trump does with powerful people. His intent is to be a part of their little insulated pockets of thriving. And he likes to feel like an important person because he gets to belong to those little pockets of thriving, and he has no interest in doing what is right. And so yes, I do believe he needs to be impeached as well, because when you think about it, his job as vice president is to be the check on the power of the president. And instead of standing up and calling this out for what it is, the wrong thing to do, or any number of the other many things that have been the wrong thing to do, Vance has chosen instead to stand by Trump because he is so desperate to try to win over the MAGA cohort who have been mesmerized by the Trump illusion. And he needs them to vote for him because he doesn't stand a chance to become president otherwise. And so we're in a really difficult situation, and Congress is not doing its job. You have Mike Johnson is a moron, and he is a bad actor with nefarious intent who has allowed our democracy to die as he has self-bound his hands and refused to allow Congress to do their good work. And Congress needs to come together and just realize we don't have what it takes to fix Iran. We don't. No amount of military might is going to be able to set things right over there. And cutting off the head of the leadership there doesn't change the reality of things as they are on the ground there. You only just enrage everybody who already has a hatred for America that has been festering for so long. And how dare America's leadership in America's name, put all of those people in harm's way. It's a complex and very difficult, frustrating situation. The contentions and the threats and the risks that Iran has presented to the world for a very long time, and everybody's in agreement we don't want Iran to get out of hand. But that's why it was important that we stood by each other in solidarity to be a legitimate force of pushback against their radical way of being, in terms of their leadership, and found a way to be able to welcome them into a situation that would helped them to help themselves to self-liberate. And going in and shooting up the place and blowing up stuff and killing off individuals, it just makes chaos and mayhem. And there's no real plan to go in and make things right. Might does not make right. The rule of law is so important because it's our peaceful way. It is the process of dialoguing, and communication has everything it needs to solve for things. But it's the threat of using violence that really is the thing that stands in our way from being able to make, lasting, peaceful progress. And that's why it was important to, really work as best as we could to communicate with the rest of the world a no-tolerance policy for Iran's attempts for nuclear proliferation. And instead of taking the necessary steps to thwart that risk, instead of, really looking at the opportunity of the dialogues that were opened and the channels of communication that were opened to be able to resolve this in a peaceful accord, instead, POTUS decided to align with what Netanyahu ultimately desired, which was to use violent force to drag America's superpower in to be, the might to fight his war that he wants to have because he believes that Iran is a threat. Which is not to say that, Iran itself, with its terrible leadership, was a threat. But again, the leadership is ranks. It's not one person. It goes throughout the entire nation, and then the people themselves. And I mean, think of all the innocent people that didn't want any of this, didn't want this terrible leadership, didn't want to live in fear, didn't want all the terrible things that are happening to them, didn't want any of that. And now they're less safe because it's a destabilizing situation. And so we've turned innocent lives into collateral. And these terrible leaders, POTUS and Netanyahu, POTUS 47 and Netanyahu both have decided it's a price that they're willing for everybody else to pay in order for them to achieve the ends that they desire. And so they nullify their legitimacy altogether. These men are not respectable. And they cannot be reasoned with because their motives behind everything they do is focused on doing harm. And it's sad. And I've been spending time trying to just think of all the innocent lives there in Iran and hoping for them to be protected and kept safe, but I understand that their lives are now made that much harder than they were before. And there are going to be many of them that probably weren't radicalized against America, but now they are. And so America is busy making more enemies in the world. Because you have leadership that is focused on looking at body counts and, taking victory laps for body counts instead of looking at the lives of the people that are lost, not just in expiration of their lives, but also their lives, their way of life is lost. There's ramifications for this that are going to echo throughout time, and it's this whole entire, sickness that now we have to find remedy to, and it's that much harder to do because of the added complexities of this new conflict. It doesn't make the world safer. Conflict never has. One of my favorite books speaks about the happenings of World War I, and it's coming from the voice of a religious leader who is trying to somehow help soldiers to reconcile in their hearts and their minds, and to help believers reconcile in their hearts and their minds how it is that we can defend what is indefensible in the sense of, the Christian values of thou shalt not kill. And he goes on to say that the moral meaning of war is that we go to war to secure peace. And thinking back on world wars that we've had before, they were righteous causes. I mean, terrible. So much violence and hatred and misery and generational trauma And isn't it so that just as the end of the generation that lived through the experiences of Pearl Harbor are coming to the ends of their lives, America is being woken up from its amnesia of the peace that we were able to secure through that process. And now we are out there under the leadership of a terribly misguided POTUS, making the same mistakes. Trying to stir up another world war. I used to be married to someone who was in the military, and he served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And knowing the human toll and the family toll and the toll it takes on a soldier to serve in these extremely difficult circumstances of going and putting your life on the line because it's your duty. But having to reconcile in your mind and your heart the fact that you can't stand by what's happening because it's based off of an indefensible position. Especially when you think that there are better ways to handle these sorts of things. And that violence should be, the last resort of self-defense. I believe in armed neutrality in a sense of not that we don't care about what's happening to others, and not that we're not willing to use our forces if necessary, but understanding that we keep everything at an arm's length so that we have the perspective to understand what it is that is the best interest for all parties involved, and that we're making decisions based off of truth, because things that are not of integrity, if it's not based on truth, it doesn't have integrity, and things not of integrity do fall apart. It has to build goodwill and friendships, and it has to be reasonable, just, fair, reasonable, right? A nation is nothing more than just an agreement that we are legitimate because we lawfully exist, based off of precedents. And so if we start going around pretending like the law doesn't matter, we delegitimize ourselves. And there are reasons why we use our power, but it's always about protecting innocence, and it's never about pushing people to limits to try to get them to do what you want to do. That's bullying, The reason why you have power is to help to create outcomes. And it's how you use that power that matters. And a truly strong person has the entire magnitude of the United States military force at their command, yet chooses to not use it unless the situation and the moment that we find a decision must be made, and understanding the histories of where we've come from and the history we're trying to build in terms of where we're going, and then you make an informed decision. You don't make it based off of, palling around with your buddy who likes to, harm things, and beat on others and bully them and steal from them and these sorts of things. It's frustrating. It's very frustrating. I had friends that were in the military that I became friends with as I was a military spouse, and I've seen how they come back, seen how my ex-husband came back from fighting, and you're a very different person. I've known people who've died. I've known people who were severely harmed and severely wounded physically and mentally and spiritually. I was a caregiver for disabled and retired veterans, and I know the toll of war on the people, and I don't consider our military personnel as just these warm bodies on holding pattern, waiting for, some deployment to go execute out on a mission in order to achieve some arbitrary ends that doesn't do what they pledged by oath to do when they joined the military, which is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. To defend the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And right now we have an enemy in the White House. He's an enemy of the state. And I'm not saying enemy like we need to go and attack him and that we need to turn our forces against him. It's an all-infighting sort of thing. Just rather like, this is a person who has decided to take a position that is contrary to the collective best interests of America. And unfortunately, they're in the ultimate position of decision-making that wields all of this power that is America. And we have nobody to put checks and balance on them because Congress has tied its own hands. And nobody has standing to be able to go and sue to bring something into the court system that says, judicial branch, help keep a check on this. So we are in a dire and desperate situation, and I don't think that we would be able to go out and protest ourselves like they did in the Vietnam War to stop this. We need to somehow be able to be as compelling as possible to this very easily manipulative ego in President Trump. We have to stop fighting him because he's like an animal in a corner and he's lashing out and he's making terrible decisions out of a state of desperation, and he's coming to the end of his life, and I'm sure he's looking for ways to hold on to a legacy. And maybe the thing that we need to really consider here in terms of a new approach, I think he's President Pandemonium. I do not like him, but I still love him as a human being. What's the quote that says, of all the sinners of the world, who needed the love and the forgiveness the most, but the devil himself? And so when I look at Trump, I look that I believe that the right voice that could reach out to him could hopefully be able to make sense to him, to get him to stop. Just to stop. I know he's surrounded by a bunch of people that are exploiting his old age and exploiting his desperations and his angers and his frustrations. They are just bringing out the worst in him. And we're not going to be able to stop him by force, but I do believe that we can compel him through the one force that is more powerful than the hatred that we have for him and his attitude and his behavior and his character and his conduct and his decision making and all the harm that he's caused everybody and the bad decisions he keeps making on our behalf. Like, we can hate that till we're blue in the face. But that is never going to be what it's going to take to turn him around and turn him away from this terrible trajectory that he's on. We need to speak to him in such a way that says, like, think of your grandchild. You know, you have love for your grandchildren. Think of your children. You have love for your children. You know, you may not be the warmest, closest, parent or grandparent, but think of them as being the ones that are having to pay the price for your decision making. And now, if you knew that your children were going to have to pay the consequences for your decision making, don't you think that you would choose wisely? I think that there's ways to compel him in that sense, to just look at it from a perspective of, if you don't do the right thing and you don't do right by us here, we in America, what you're creating as consequence for your children and your grandchildren and your legacy is for everybody to attack that. You're putting your family and your legacy in harm's way. Because how could the families of the soldiers that are going to have to go and die on foreign soil on your behalf because of your decision making, how are they ever going to be able to reconcile in their heart the forgiveness that would be necessary to forgive you for making this terrible decision that cost their children their lives? And then they're going to look to your children, and then they're going to say it's not fair that your children get to live. Your children never had to go on the front lines and had to pay this price. And you're creating this unnecessary hatred for America. Because people are going to start to associate it that it's not just the president, it's the whole government, it's the whole system. And you're breaking down the trust in those systems that we have. And then people are starting to turn on each other. I have been spending some time speaking with a friend whose family is very magnified. That some of those family members are starting to wake up into the reality of the misplaced trust in Trump. And it's really hard for them to reconcile. And we're having to come up with dialogue together of how to it's almost like a disaster victim after, a terrible storm, and we have to bring them in and give them covers and hold them close and give them comfort and, explain to them, we're sorry that this happened, but it's gonna be okay. You're not alone. You're here with us. We got your back. We're looking after you. And then to help them with the healing process of reconciling the grief of losing this sense of trust in the world. Their innocence has been violated, because they place trust in somebody and then they realize only after it was too late that it was the wrong thing to do. And so we're coming up with these conversations that we can have, and then us also having to reconcile the reality of, like, you know, there are plenty of people that we have had to stand firm against what they were doing in defense of MAGA. And now we are having to come to terms with forgiving them as they transfer away from that and start diverging from that path. We in ourselves have to find a way to come to peace with that. And that's part of the healing process too. And our nation right now, I've been listening to trustworthy voices and them expressing, you know, the insanity and the craziness, and, you know, also like laughing at the fact that, you know, so many of these people who like placed trust in Trump and then stood by him and everything he said, these people like fighting with the grieving process of, you know, a lot of people in denial, and like all of the sudden everything they said was a value that they did care about, all of a sudden no, that doesn't matter anymore because MAGA, you know, like people who were like, you know, we can't go to war with Iran, that's a terrible idea, you know, it should never happen, and, you know, we gotta vote for Trump because that's the only way that sort of war is not gonna happen, and here's Trump doing it, and now these people, you know, are like, oh no, this is chill, this is totally cool, we needed to do this because, you know, XYZ 1, 2, 3. And it's troubling to see these people still in this state of denial, and it makes you wonder how to wake them up, because you can't reach these people with facts, but you can reach them through feelings, you know. And facts are important too, but you have to wrap it in feelings, you know. It reminds me of this just brilliant young man who's a very trustworthy voice, and I very much appreciate him and enjoy listening to him because he helps me keep my finger on the pulse of youth today. His name is Adam Mockler. Brilliant young man. I was introduced to him by my child, who was like, oh my gosh, Mom, you gotta check out this guy, it's hilarious. He like sits around and he debates all of these MAGA people and just like injects their brain with common sense, and it's amazing just to see when minds expand and like facts matter, you know. Anyways, bless him, he's amazing, brilliant, keep up the good work. But he uses this reference in one of the videos that I watched him. I think he was on CNN having a conversation, and I've heard him repeat similar concepts before, but it was, you have to wrap something around the feelings, the facts with the feelings, in order for people to grasp it, and I agree, I very much agree with that. Like, I think that's the way to win over, you know, MAGA hearts and minds, because that's what I've been able to put into practice, and it works. You know, we've tried for years, guys, to fight MAGA. I was like, you know, you're tell them how stupid they are, and they're making poor decisions, and you're hurting people, don't you care? And, you know, like, you're being lied to by these people that you're following, and doesn't it matter to you? Like, and you can throw all the sensibilities you want and all the facts you want, but the truth of the matter is that until you touch their hearts in such a way that opens their minds, information's not going to be going in. And so I really think that's where our focus has to go in, like, you know, because I'm thinking of it in terms of like the outcomes. I'm always thinking of it in terms of outcomes, and what outcomes are we engineering for, and what are the results that we want to get, and how can we aim as best we can to get at that. And for me, it's about finding a way to create a welcoming situation that all people can thrive on. And I know the power of shame and blame and guilt and regret and resentment and rejection and all of these things. Like, I'm human too. I've lived a life, of experience. I know how hard it is to come into acceptance with that. And I see all of these people who are waking up to the reality of MAGA facade, having to make sense of a world that, has been completely obliterated in terms of what used to matter to them. And so I know they're going to have to go through all those same feelings, and they're going to have to process it into acceptance. And knowing that they're not ever going to get there unless we find a way to welcome them into a situation they can thrive on. Welcome them with love and appreciation and acceptance, and being like, it is okay, we all make mistakes. We all misplace trust in the wrong people. And they did lead us into a bad place. And we are suffering the consequences of other people's poor decision making. But we have to come to terms with, we're waking up to the reality that they used us, and they used our power and our energy and our life force, and took away all of our real emotions and replaced it with this artificial sense of attachment to things that don't actually matter, and have intentionally caused us to separate from other people, because it turned a sense of that the world's a scary place, and that bad people will hurt you, and the only way to protect yourself is to hurt others, and MAGA really has always been about this dog eat dog, mighty crush the weak, free for all hellscape. And seeing how people thrive in that environment, the lows that they have to stoop to, the inhumanities and the depravity and the cruelty and the hatred and the violence that they have to constantly be feeding in, and then watching what it does to their mind and their hearts. It changes them, and it turns their souls dark, and it shuts them off to the rest of the world, and then they close in, and then they cut off from their emotions, and it makes it harder and harder to reach them. But this MAGA isn't integrity bound, and so it's falling apart, and then you see all these different factions and these extreme, divergences from it. And I see a lot of potential in people that are waking up to the reality is I didn't vote for this. And I really just want to extend an olive branch to those people and say, yeah, I know, nobody wanted to vote for this. Nobody wanted to believe that America would vote for a president that would betray us in these ways. Nobody wanted to believe that, there was this cartel, guised in this, political movement of belonging for everybody, but really it packaged itself inside of that, and now that it used your power to get into this position, it's doing things that aren't in your best interest. And now we have POTUS taking America into a war. And I see the MAGA cohort starting to break even farther away from Trump. Some of them trying to latch on harder because the desperation of, not wanting to let go of the status quo, and they're clinging to the skirts of, what they know and the comforts of it. And they really need to be enticed with this sense of but there is something that you can choose that isn't about you living in this state of fear and frustration and anger, and we can make better choices. And I think that by compelling people within the MAGA cohort to turn away from their sense that it's all about Trump and it's all about what he does and what he thinks and what he says, and you're always listening to him because it's you don't know what to do or think for yourself anymore. You've abdicated that responsibility conveniently because it's so much easier to let somebody else do the hard work, But now it's this person in your name is doing these terrible things, and your guilty conscience is starting to feed into it, and it's realizing, and you're trying to make sense of it and justify or denial and all these things. But I think there's a way to reach these people and say, listen, at the end of the day, with the demigod stuff all aside, the cult-like following all aside, all of that, at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We want to live happy, healthy, thriving lives. We want our children to thrive. We want to see abundance and prosperity. We want to hear America's name be, respected, and for the world to look to us, in honor and respect who we are and what we represent. And you want America to be a place worth defending. You want to know you're going to wake up every day and you're going to be excited to be a part of an American situation that is full of opportunity and potentials and promise, and that your struggle is going to be lessened because we're all working together to find ways to just make stuff work, and to really have a sense of belonging that isn't about an us versus them in America. It's about you and I make an us, and those that choose to belong a part of something that's bigger than any one of us can do alone. There's so much pride to be had in that, to the point where we no longer look at things in terms of somebody's value being of how much money or influence they have, but rather recognizing their inherent human ingenuity, special and unique to them. The world needs you, and the world needs you at your best, and we want to champion for your success, and we want to see you succeed and thrive, and that doesn't have to happen at the disadvantage of anybody else, And if we can start getting some MAGA people to kind of wake up to that reality, they would be able to, be, because they're already trusted voices in the MAGA cohort. They trust each other, they listen to each other, they reinforce each other. It's like a whole silo thing, in their information bubbles, and you listen to them, and it's like a bunch of NPCs or whatever they call them. And so all you have to do is inject into a few of them this sensibility of what if MAGA doesn't mean Trump is almighty and powerful? What if MAGA really is about, we work together to make something together out of America, that when we look at it, we can say to ourselves, man, this is great, And when these great things happen, we know it's because this is America. And to have a sense that, we're all in this together, we're not always going to see eye to eye. It's impossible. We're just varied and diverse. It's impossible to see eye to eye, but, I can see you, and you can see me, and while, your perception of me is going to be different than my perception of myself, the argument isn't for you to consider me as I consider myself, or for me to consider you as you consider yourself, but rather recognize that you are an independent person, and you have been endowed by your Creator with life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness as a right. A Creator-given right. And it's not my place, it's not anybody else's place to try to take that away from you. And I know that the best chance for you to be able to pursue your version of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness has to be me respecting that what you want is not what I want, but we have something in common in the sense of we all want the liberty to pursue, what we want to make us happy. And that's going to take us living in accordance with each other with respects for one another. And it's going to take us accepting, we're not always going to get along. We got to find ways to, reconcile this stuff. That's when we, turn to our government to say, can you help us solve the intractability of this problem? Because we just can't figure it out for ourselves. And to find a way where, we stop looking at America, if it's so great, you can't look at us as if we're, in lack and in want, and to be able to call that great. And there are many people in America who are thriving. They have so much, they have big, beautiful, wonderful houses, they have fancy cars, they got great clothes, they can eat out at any restaurant that they want to, they, go travel the world and have all these experiences, they can walk in any store, buy whatever they want, and there's no cares, they can buy things, big, huge, expensive things, and then just, use them for a week and then get rid of them because it doesn't matter, and great, if that's your happiness, man, you do you, to each their own. You go out and you live it up, and you invest in your health and your well-being and your beauty and your style and your fashion, and you go out and have experiences, you go to movies, you go to concerts, I love it, do it all, but I want that for everybody. And not in a sense of I want everybody to live in this high fidelity, everybody has all this money and we be swimming in it. No, I want everybody to be able to find their sense of this is a good life for me, and I'm happy with what I have. I'm not content in the sense of I'm ever going to stop and striving for higher ideals. Of course, that's the passionate push that is part of the American experience and the American spirit. But at least you don't have to worry about, am I going to be able to make it till my next payday, before I run out of money and don't have enough to pay for food? Or I have to not eat today because I have to put gas in my truck to be able to drive around, or that, you can't afford to live and you have to, pool your resources with a bunch of other people in order to just get along and survive. And, these precarious situations that so many people are living in, and then you look at the people that are just left by the side of the road, and then the people in the upper echelon who have it made, they have the equivalent of FU money, have the audacity to say the solution to, solve the problem for all these homeless people that are, living in squalor on the street, and it's making the roads look bad and dirty, and you don't want to deal with these people because they're weird, because they're not living like you're living, and they're in their own little world or whatever. That people, in this upper echelon look at people in the lower echelon as, just nuisances, and so let's just shoot them. You know what I'm saying? It's like, that's not reasonable either. And it's just like, think about it in a sense of, you want what's best for your children. You should want what's best for everybody's children, and everybody is somebody's child. At what age, when do we stop caring about protecting the innocence of people? And innocence is the matter of not having the knowledge of the evils of the world. That's innocence. And as soon as you become conscious of it and you become aware of it, it's Pandora's box. There's no putting it back in. And your mind changes, your life changes, your orientation changes with the world. And because there's so much violence against personhood and violence against innocence in the world, many people's innocence is being violated, and they're irrevocably harmed. And then there are all of these wounded people and walking around America, in this terrible situation, and they're not thriving as they could be if we just created a situation where their innocence could have been protected, and in the aftermath of it being violated, finding a way to be able to restore them to wholeness. And, don't look at people as problems. People are not problems. People are people. There's somebody to love and to care about and care for and respect and appreciate and be in service to. You don't have to give up your happiness in order to help others. But if you can help somebody to help themselves, they can then help somebody else. And I think that if we can foster that type of, paradigm which people opt into, and we start living out from that, and it's no longer about looking at people that are in the MAGA cohort as being, irredeemable, but rather just lost souls that really just need to come into the light of awareness that, we are in this together, that they would be able to hopefully be the trusted voices of other people that are deeper into the MAGA cohort, and then eventually reach into those who are in the inner circle of Trump and help him to listen to good voices that are trying to lead him into a good direction, a positive direction. And I think that, because I'm very much a believer in personal development, self-development, personal development courses have been a big part of my life. It's helped me to transcend, trauma that I've had to experience in my life, and has helped me to become a better person and to realize my amazing human experience, my human connection. And it's helped me to, really put into words and protocols the capacity to transcend some really terrible situations, and to do it on my own terms in my own way. So it's not somebody else telling me what to do, but it's me in this becoming process, actualizing my highest version and enjoying the process along the way. I think that inviting people into that type of situation and creating that healing paradigm for everybody to involve in, will be able to lift people out of bad situations and put them in better environments where they can start making better decisions, and then they become less of a threat to one another. You know, it's like, was it Marjorie Taylor Greene? Bless her soul. Not a perfect person, has made very many mistakes. I remember a time when I used to consider her, and the rhetoric that I heard her say and the things I watched her do when she was just like hard in championing for MAGA. And she was a very repulsive person to me. And I mean, I had to pray for her. Like, I don't understand how you can be that way. But whatever brought her into awakening, into the light, she's not totally out of this, you know, but she's learning and she's really trying and she's redeeming herself and making amends, and she's expanding her awareness, and she's personally developing, and she's trying to champion as a voice that's a part of the MAGA movement to say, listen guys, this is not what we agreed to. This is not what we were, you know, sold and told. And, you know, we bought into a lie, obviously, because everything that we were promised is now, you know, we're being played for fools about. And so she's helping to wake up a lot of people. And now with this whole, you know, attack on Iran, after Trump promised he wasn't going to do that, there's many more MAGA minds that are like expanding and being like, oh wow, you know, here I thought, you know, Trump could do no wrong, and here he is doing something that in my terms and conditions is wrong. You know, he said he wasn't going to do that, but he's doing it. Like, I'm not cool with this. And so you start to take those steps back from him, and you need somewhere to go. You know, and MAGA is not going to want to, like, turn towards the Democrats and be in this loving, full embrace. Like, I don't think that's ever going to happen. I mean, like, I don't even fully embrace the Democrats, you know? So I don't anticipate that they would just do this total turnaround and go running for the Democrats because it's the only other viable option. I really think that they need to find a political home for, you know, the lost and wayward souls that have, I mean, consistently, repeatedly over the years misplaced trust in the, you know, two-party system, this binary choice of lesser evils. You know, I remember Elon Musk used to be leaning towards Democrat. I mean, I remember when he went and met with Obama and really was pushing for SpaceX to be accepted and advanced, and, you know, when he was pushing for trying to get, you know, Tesla to be able to succeed, and he's looking for the government for subsidies, and he's cozying up with them, and he leaned more in line with Democrats. And then, you know, whatever, you know, happened to him and getting enclosed in isolation from the more power, money, and influence he got, the more less human he became, and the more, you know, detached from reality, and he lost sight of the common human touch and, like, the things that matter. And he started to turn towards Republicans because he was trying to, I mean, what it appears to be, retain more of his wealth. And then he didn't like the bureaucracies of, you know, the Democratic Party is very much about, you know, the bureaucracy of things. And he just saw them as barriers, and he got frustrated with it, and he eventually just snapped, and then he went full raging MAGA, and now he's pouring all his money and all of his resources and all of his attention and his heart, like, and it hurts to see his fall from grace. It's been so painful. But, you know, he took this just hard right turn because he was fed up with what was being done to him that prevented him from doing what he wanted to accomplish, that he was working hard to do. And it was like the government was binding his hands, And so he turned to the side that said, no, we're going to free up your hands because we respect you because you have lots of money. And I'm sure it's not just as simple as that. There's many complexities to it, and he's a complex person, but the point that I'm using as him as an example is that there's so many people that have turned hard away from the Democrats because of, the high on your horse and, way of doing things that is not necessarily a welcoming situation for everyone. And I mean, it's open and it's very, embracing diversity and stuff like that, but sometimes it's like shove it in your face and people don't want to see that, and so you get this hard knee-jerk reaction. It's like the pendulum way swinging back and forth, and it's like, I just want to bring things into like this moderating space where we can all belong. Like, I want people to feel like, they can pursue Republican values, the good parts of it and the good parts of the Democratic values, but leave off the extremes away from our government, because we need to keep ourselves closer to a central view, because that's going to be the thing that like helps to make sure that we don't have to fight with each other, and scream at each other from across the distance. And I hate saying it because it hurts my heart that we have to go through pain in order to learn lessons, but it's the way of the world right now, and we are all in pain and suffering, and we're having to go through a healing process, and we got to find a way to do that together. And I think that there's a way to make politics that's healing, but it's not weird woo-woo, but rather just saying, like, it hurts to be lied to by those people you place trust in, and it hurts to think that, there are people that work so hard to prevent you from actualizing yourself or being true to yourself or what you believe is best. And it is frustrating when you try to do things and then there's people that are intentionally holding you back, because their sets of values are, metriced in a different way than yours are, and, the government isn't a corrective mechanism like it's supposed to be to help to, solve for the intractability of that problem of how do you reconcile between these people wanting to do this, but these people wanting to do that, but you can't do both. It's like, how do you achieve consensus between different people and different needs and wants and requirements? And it's frustrating to see POTUS 47 punish and deny people who are Democrats and Democratic states, and even when there's Republicans that live in those states, those people are, casualties of his war against the Democrats, and it has to hurt those people because it's like the things that they need, like, tunnels and bridges to be built and maintained, and, the trade tariff wars that are happening, making small businesses close down and farms to go bankrupt, and, this is just as much MAGA that's going through this as it is, Democrats. And everybody else in between. There's so many independents and like, no label, non-affiliate citizens, and I mean, that's where I land. I lean in this weird oscillation constantly between liking things about the traditional, respectable parts of the Republican Party and the traditional, original respects of the Democrat Party, and I reconcile those two things constantly with this sense of, like, when I hear people speak, it's everybody wants to not feel like the government is dictating their lives, but they also want to make sure that the government is not allowing people just to run rampant and go crazy. And so we have to have these happy mediums that we find with one another, and, you know, compromising on some things that we want in order to just, like, recognize there's something better than just something that we want, you know? Like, I want this specifically. It's like, yeah, but there's something that's beyond that we all want. You know what I'm saying? And working towards that's far more important than one political side winning, you know, or causing harm to the other side, and it's like somehow a diplomatic victory, you know, if you're able to, you know, defeat the other. And, like, I hate that so much. It's like, why are you wasting your political capital, your personal capital, your financial capital on infighting, you know? And I just really wish that we were able to stop wasting our resources as a nation, including our human ingenuity, on constantly infighting with one another. I want to welcome people who are in the MAGA cohort right now, who are disillusionized from what Trump is doing to them that he promised he would never do, and invite them into a situation of saying, like, I'm really sorry that he's done this to you. You deserved better, and you hoped for better, and it's understandable that you're disappointed right now, and it's going to take some work for you to reconcile that. But in the meantime, now that you realize that, you know, that isn't what you thought it was, like, maybe you could be willing to listen to something that could be more interesting, you know, a new offering that doesn't make you have to deny or reject or live in shame for making a mistake. We all make mistakes, but this is the great thing about it. You know, my pops, he ran a drug and alcohol program for many years, and I used to converse with him all the time, very interested, like, how does this program work? You know, how do you take broken people? How do you take people that were living in this, you know, inescapable paradigm of self-destruction and help them to help themselves to transform out of that, to find themselves on solid ground from which they can start making better decisions that are informed off of this sense of that's not what they want anymore. It's what they lived in, you know, but that's not who they are. You know, you're not the mistakes that you made, you're the choices that you make today. And my pops taught me a lot about helping people to just find discipline in constantly saying no to that and yes to something that is much more rewarding, you know? And it's very much the same thing with people that are in the far left. Like, I'm gonna be honest, I don't really associate into that so much because the MAGA people are holding the narrative on that, you know, in the mainstream. And what I see is there are just a lot of super duper fed up people that, like, get crazy about it. But that happens with anybody who is left to their own devices, and they have no sense that things are ever going to be able to get better. And, you know, when there's time, idle hands, as they say. And so what I understand from that is, like, there's some people who are likened to those who were in the civil rights movement that, instead of taking the peaceful path to protest, chose for themselves to do violence because they felt violence meant you have to meet violence with violence in order to fight fire with fire, sort of thing. but didn't understand the difference between you fighting with fire is not about tit for tat, you know, it's having a different kind of fire. The thing that drives you has to be, you know, something that is far more powerful, and I believe that Bad Bunny did an excellent job of expressing that, you know, when he won his Grammy, and then when he went on to play the Super Bowl halftime show this year, you know, to express, like, you know, whatever you may think, whatever you may have been led to believe about, you know, people like me, I'm just as human as you, you know. That was very much what his entire halftime performance showed, is like, I'm a human like you. I think, I feel, I want, I need, you know, I delight in life, and the simple things and the big things, and, you know, we're all just human, and we're living this life, and it's a full-on experience, and I know where I come from, and I know where I'm going, and this is where I am right now, and I'm going to be in your face about it, to say, like, I'm not an animal, you know, I'm human, we're family, human family, you know. And he expressed that the only thing more powerful than hate is love, and it's so true. And, you know, that's the thing that we have to, like, really, you know, become lockstep with in terms of our movements. Always fall back on the lowest common denominator. You know, we're diverse, and there's differentiation, and, you know, there's many different variables, and everything is a combinatorics. But when you bring things down to the most simple basic unit, it's that there is a force that is much higher than anything else that we think we have power to do, you know, or the powers that we know that physics does. And to me, I've always thought of it as a God indivisible. And it's the same thing when I think of the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag. I don't think it's, you know, to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible. It's under a God indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Because there's only one thing that should be a higher power than the union of a independent and free nation, a leader of the free world, and that should be, you know, the inseparableness of us, the thing that says, like, inescapably we are eternally bound and connected to each other, and you gotta love that. Because if you don't love that, and you don't love others, you can't love yourself, and you're just harming yourself. And it's a hard place to go to, especially when you're surrounded by people who are choosing variant expressions of the self in such a way that does harm to your sense of self. And I get it. Like, in wanting to be angry about it and harmful about it, it's understandable, because it's like your sense of, you know, lashing out at a world that seems to just not be in agreement with what you need it to do, and it's like a sense of needing to control the world. I get it. Without the sense of controlling the world, you feel unsafe, and then you start making decisions based off of, how do I make myself safe? There's two movements that we always make: away from pain or towards pleasure. That's the sum of it for all human beings. And there is a way to, like, be in the space of knowing that, you know, there is good and then there's bad in everything. The point is to not go bad with things when they go bad. The point is to always remedy it with the only thing that does heal it, and that is to lean into the goodness, the pleasure, the delight, you know, the love and the light and the way, you know, because it's impossible for the darkness to exist in its entirety without light, but the light can't exist without its contrast in the dark. And so there's going to be times when bad things happen, but we always have to find a way to reconcile back into the goodness of things. And, it's a challenge that's presented to all of us, but I think if we can start seeing each other as we're all working on that same problem together but alone, like, we can start coming from that place of like, okay, well, I love myself, I respect myself, I appreciate myself, and that's the beginning of power. And then you recognize that you are inescapably intertwined and embedded in a society in where everything is connected and we're all interdependent on each other, and you can't force and control other people. All you can do is to help them to help themselves to make the best decisions based off of the, best for everybody. And to invite them into a situation where it's like, be consciously aware that there's others that are going to be impacted by your decisions too. So please bear patience and be considerate of others, have empathy and to want the best for everyone, and, do so in such a way where it's like understanding people are going to have to come to terms with their shitty versions and be invited to transcend it to do better. And there's so much hope in that, because then we can be in a space where when pain happens, we will always have something that we can fall on that brings us happiness and joy. I think of it as like today when I heard the news of what happened with America, attacking Iran. I had to do some self-care in order to not internalize that and for it to become a stressor, so I did my coping mechanisms to cope with the fact that it's like, I can't change this, and I accept the fact that I can't change this. And what I can change is, how it makes me feel. And I went through the sense of, anger and frustration and, disappointment and sadness and, righteous anger and wanting to change things. And I put all of that forces into an acceptance of, okay, this is our new norm. This isn't what I would have pictured and not what I would have wanted, but this is where we are. And now how do we move forward in the best direction? And in order to, solving problems is healing to me, it's like why I like to fix things and solve things and be of service to others, because it's healing for me. But then I took time to listen to some of my favorite music, and I found some new music, and I went for a very long walk, and I listened to some of my recordings, and I spent some time reflecting on a role model of leadership that we could have had in former Vice President Kamala Harris, thinking of what America would be today had we had her as president instead of Trump, and then thinking about what that really means in terms of, how we got here and how we can move forward from here. Like, all of these things, were a way for me to, metabolize the pain and transmute it into purpose. And purpose that is rewarding and fulfilling to me, because I'm moving forward in solving problems that I've seen have arisen. And that's why I'm here making this video. I've also took time today to listen to the UN in their emergency meeting that they called. And, I have such deep respect for the UN. I mean, to me, it is it is so amazing that we can all come together, you know, together but alone, independent but interdependent, in a way where we're agreeing like the best way for us to foster a world that works for everybody is that everybody has a seat at the table, everybody's voice is heard, you know, they get to express their, you know, hopes and their dreams and their visions and their frustrations, you know, and then for that to all be considered on the merits, for us to find a way to like now make resolutions, commit to those resolutions, and then move forward together in the most constructive way possible, willingly investing ourselves in our resources, our time, effort, and our energy, you know, to apply those things in the ways we can in our own independent way, while respecting that other people are going to be doing it in their own way, and then finding ways that we can work together to help reinforce one another's, you know, shore up the weaknesses of everybody else with the strengths that we might have that could be of service to other people's strengths, you know, weaknesses, so that they can be strengthened. And that's what the UN symbolizes to me. And so listening to them today to talk, it was there's always a sense of like, you know, the same old diplomatic, you know, words. I mean, their word pools are very similar to one another. And it does make me wonder sometimes if that doesn't make them less constructive as they could be if it wasn't always about diplomatic pageantries and it was more about getting to the principles, the meat of the matter, and to be able to really truly speak your mind. I understand the respects of diplomacies and decorum and these sorts of things important. Respectful, polite conversation, so important. Like it would solve so many misunderstandings in society and thus therefore resolve a lot of conflicts. But, you know, listening in, and it's just like when you have people like POTUS 47 not respecting the UN, the power of that presence of the council has been diminished, and the voice is being, you know, drowned out by those with loud megaphones. And so it hurts my heart because, like, listening into what they were saying about what's happening and the hope that people have, and just people reinforcing, like, come on guys, the agreements, you know, we have all agreed that we aren't going to do this stupid shit to each other anymore, and, you know, here we are again. And it's like, it's frustrating to see that, but it's also very encouraging because it's dialogue, at least in the sense of like everybody gets their turn to talk, and they're talking with each other, not at each other. Even though sometimes it's at each other. You see some of the jabs that happen today of people, especially the I don't know who it is, this UN representative from the United States of America that was there today. I do not like him. He's a terrible communicator, and he was just like a parrot that was talking back MAGA talking points. And for him to have the audacity to say that, you know, nobody's willing to solve this problem called Iran, and so America just came in and did it using our force because we're powerful and you should be saying thanks. Like, okay, dog will sum up. That's not exactly what he said, but I mean, it was just cockiness, not confidence. Like, he totally missed the point of the exercise. And, you know, I projected a sense of weakness because every time I hear people, like, you know, mimic and echo MAGA talking points, it's like it shows how weak and pathetic and servile that these people are, and it breaks my heart because it's like, don't you have your own self-respect to not just like repeat what everybody else is saying? Like, can't you just think for yourself? You know, it's okay to, like, you know, echo good talking points, but when you're just parroting back what somebody else told you to say, I mean, you're no better than, like, you know, a chatbot, you know, that has been trained to insert answer here. But that helped me to feel better about things today, because at least there's adults in the room. There's people that care, that are working towards trying to find solutions, reminding everybody, you know, why it's important to abide by international laws, and, you know, to condemn those sorts of behaviors that we can't tolerate in a civil society, you know, in a civilization. You know, if we're going to get along, we need to do so in such a way where we're not, like, reducing everything to, you know, conflict constantly. And so finding, you know, peace and resolve, and lots of good communication that helped inform my decision making in terms of, like, how I would proceed forward from here if I was president. You know, I'm really grateful for them, because I think that they're good voices trying to lead, you know, the future in a positive direction. And, you know, so these are the things that I do for myself to help to reconcile the fact that, you know, I now exist in a world where America has used the force of military against another nation and caused irreparable harm. And I'm not okay with those outcomes. And it hurts my heart to witness people trying to give justifications for it. It hurts even more people who are championing for it and giving congratulations for it, and a whole wide array of excuses to normalize it. It also hurts my heart to see so many people, like, condemn it and say this is wrong. But that's where it stops. You know, they're not doing something to change it, you know. And so I spent a lot of time reflecting today on this concept that I've been working on for a long time of creating a civics branch of government. It would be considered the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. It's a reimagining of the Equal Rights Amendment. It is an expansion of it, which also includes personal dominion, that helps to give an extra layer of insular protection for Americans to make sure that the government isn't infringing upon their independence, their individual lives. And then citizens having a seat at the table, very much likened to how the UN has their seats at the table and everybody gets to talk and it's on the record and it's considered. But goes beyond that by adding a technological innovation into the workings of it, because we are a digitally connected society, to help everybody to build digital architectures together independently but infused together to give life to an American identity through a coordinated innovation that helps to inform the discretion and discernment of the POTUS, so that in a case where, you know, POTUS 47 would have had this and it wasn't just geared towards, like, I'm pretty sure he was informed by artificial intelligence systems and that's how they made this strategy for what ended up unfolding. But, it's closed off, and it doesn't include the voice of the people, and I think that if these intelligent systems were informed by the voice of the people, it would help the actual government fulfill the will of the people, which is their purpose. It's not the other way around. And which I don't understand why MAGA is so willing to abdicate their responsibilities and duties as citizens, but also at the same time, complain about freedoms and liberties, but they, give all of that away so willingly to somebody else. They enslave themselves to this ideal of this cult-like ideology, and then, chain themselves to this man, and then they become impossible to be free thinkers because they have to always default to him. But in the sense of I think if more people had a sense that their voices being heard and being considered and taken into account, and that can inform POTUS, and that POTUS would have to make decisions only after reflecting on what the will of the people are, especially in the considerations of today's military operation. There was no dire, impending, imminent threat that required decisive action, without deference to, the controlling body of Congress that holds the power of decision making as to whether or not military action could be taken against a foreign nation. With very small exceptions of, these emergency type scenarios, which we were not in. There was no imminent threat or danger to America, so executive discretion couldn't have defaulted to, unilateral, execution of these forces. We have the separations of powers, and Congress as a total embodiment as a whole have to come to mutual decisions to allow for that to happen or not. Now consider if the only way that could even come up, to a decision would have to first defer to the American people to say, we are considering taking this stance, and these are the reasons why we really believe that there is this scenario universe in which Iran can do harm to America if they are allowed to continue on the path that they're taking. And given the variables of activities that they're doing that are increasing the sense that they're growing more hostile towards us, and we want to preempt any measures that could, result in some sort of attack on America, caught off guard, we want to, do the best we can to mitigate any risks and prevent things from, escalating to something much larger and more damaging, and so we need to take some preemptive measures to solve for this, potential variable of threat. So we're going to take this precision action in these sorts of ways that we think will solve for it, without having to reveal any of the secret stuff about it, but saying we are going to use military force, we are going to have boots on the ground, we are going to have people that are going to do these sorts of things. We know that this is a direct impact, and that we're going to have to take these other mission modes in the aftermath, because we're not just going there to blow shit up and run away, like a hit and run. It's we have to do something there to help to stabilize the situation after we mess things up. So we're going to have to commit this much to it. Are you, the American people, willing to go in with us on this, given, the facts and the figures that you understand, terms and conditions of this situation? Would you be willing to pledge your life, your fortune and your sacred honor, for this to be something that we do in the name of America? And for the American people to be able to say, fuck to the no, excuse my language, or to be able to say, yeah, we're all in, or like, give me more information, to have some sense of us going back and forth, because especially because it's the American people who are going to have to live in the consequences of that. They should be, consulted with these decision making. And we don't have a mechanism in government right now to do that. I mean, close proximity is how POTUS 47 uses his Truth Social media platform. He governs via fiat off of, one, post to the next, and thank you for attention to this matter. And, it's very informal, and, it's unfortunate because it forces people to be on his platform, that probably don't want to be there and wouldn't otherwise be there if not for the fact that he's forcing everybody to go there to be able to listen to what other crazy, new policy he's exacting from that position. But something along the lines of a technology to which everybody can come together and dialogue what we consider important to ourselves, and help us to work out other things too. Like, it doesn't always have to be like I'm, giving insight to, POTUS and insight to Congress. It could also just be like, I'm giving insight to the general population, to citizens, to say, like, listen guys, this is really what's happening right here. And we would be able to work more cohesively to get things done if we had a common platform. But in such a way where it can't be, selfishly capitalized by, a president, and it's not his personal platform. It should be a collective public town square, that it's not a profit-making, mechanism, and it's not about stealing your information or to, invade your privacy. No, it's literally just about common interest, mutual benefit, all of us together working on informing systems so we can make decisions that are based off of, like, the best interest of everybody involved. And that POTUS would have to, refer to that when making considerations about what sort of things they're going to do moving forward. Congress can refer to that to say, well, POTUS wants to make this movement, or we want to make this movement in terms of laws. Let's refer to the people and see, like, what they really want. Instead of, like, only special interests, lobbyists, or the few people that are able to get in to talk to Congress, who intentionally avoid people sometimes. Only a few voices inform them, and then they try to act like they understand their constituencies. It's like, especially, people that don't do town halls, it's like, you can't say you listen to the people, but this would be a way that you could, and you could tap into that anytime, and it's not based off of needing to, call somebody on a poll and be like, what do you think about this fact? It's like, literally, everybody knows where to go, where the fucking complaint box is, excuse my language, but you know where to go to leave your comments, concerns, suggestions, and complaints. And that they're going to be not just heard or listened to, but they're going to make a difference because they'll be weighted and metriced, so we can understand the variables at play, and so we can make informed decisions, and the government can make informed decisions that really does reflect the will of the people. And then utilizing that as a way of being able to pool people who are relevant stakeholders in regards to a situation or a matter, and to also be able to identify people who can be, an objectionable, outsider, unbiased, that we would be able to make an opinion on the matter based off of facts from a non-detached, no skin in the game situation. So many far degrees removed from, it being relevant to them. There's no conflicting interest, so that they could give a better informed perspective and we would have an instantaneous pooling of all the people that would be able to contribute in those ways. And so we can find resolutions almost instantaneous, and think of the fact of how slow government is right now. This would speed things up much faster, and not done in a way that's happening right now with expedient fixes to everything. You know, POTUS 47, I don't like this, I'm gonna bomb that, you know, and, you know, I don't like this, I'm gonna, like, send a bunch of, you know, armed militia into, you know, city streets. You know, I don't like this, I'm going to cut off your funding. I don't like this, I'm going to fire you. Those sorts of things would not be able to happen anymore, because there is a process by which there's permissions that have to be granted, and there's requests that have to be made, and there's a formal system to it, and the people themselves are a part of the process of the decision making. You can't bypass them, you know? And there's a way to, you know, do it with efficiencies so that it's not like you're constantly bogged down by this system of, you know, indecisiveness. It's determining the relevant factors, what actually matters, making a decision on those points to move forward in such a way where it is consensus building. It may not be everybody agrees now, but we can agree mostly on this is something that has the best chance of proceeding forward with the highest chance of success. And leaning into that with intention in such a way where everybody knows, like, you're not always going to get what you want, but sometimes you'll find that you get what you need. And that's more important because, again, you can't control all variables in a scenario universe, especially when there's, you know, free will. But what you can do is to be compelling and persuasive, and we can dialogue and communicate, we can assert boundaries, and we can, you know, reinforce ideals, and we can assert authorities and demand that the law be adhered to. And all of these things can happen in such a way where we're working together in a way where we're informing systems that weigh and measure those considerations, take them into account, and then give a readout on the other end for POTUS to be able to read and say, oh yeah, you know, I want to go and just bomb, Iran to obliteration, and, you know, but the American people aren't willing to pledge their life, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to go do that, so I'm probably going to have to find a different way. And on top of that, there's not enough people in Congress that would back that idea, and I need their permission because they're the key that unlocks the power for me to be able to do that. So with these checks and balances in the government, you know, and knowing that POTUS is like, my ultimate goal, ultimate oath is to uphold the Constitution, so, you know, Supreme Court doesn't have to come and tell me you're breaking the law again. These checks and balances work together in a more constructive and cohesive way, and it gives everybody a way to be on the same page. And it gives people a sense of autonomy and agency and capital and resource and skin in the game, and their voice is heard, and they can feel like they're being cared for and cared about, and it can be a corrective mechanism to say, actually, President Trump, you told us on the campaign trail you weren't going to get us into any more crazy wars for nothing, you know, and in a sense, you're contractually obligated to fulfill that campaign promise, and then when you don't, if you don't have a reasonable way to argue, you know, the justifications that we can all agree on the terms and conditions, like, okay, given the needs of now, befit the time, sure, we have to, like, you know, let go of some of our wants to embrace the things that we need moving forward, because it's a constantly evolving situation. Like, if you can't justify that, then you are out of line, and it's a dereliction of duty, and you are now going to be triggered into proceedings of, you know, contempt and potentially impeachment, and use that as a mechanism to not just worry about, you know, who's in office in Congress, to whether or not impeachment is even going to be in the realm of potentials, The people can help to determine that. And then the Congress has to reflect the will of the people. You wouldn't have a congressperson that would be able to say, I'm acting on behalf of my constituency, when you can see in the variables of your constituency, the majority, over majority, are saying, hell to the no, I don't want that to happen. You can't justify your actions because they don't reconcile with the realities that we can see. The proof is in the pudding, motherfucker. You can't say that this, excuse my language, you can't say that this is what the people want when the people are telling you, no, that's not what we want, you know? And if the congressperson wants that to happen and they think that's the best interest, they have to be compelling and speak to the people to say, let me persuade you as to why we need to do this, you know, not just tell you, you know, this is what we're going to do because this is my justification, but like explain to you, you know, this is the justification. Can I please, you know, get you to come along with me in this because I need you just as much as you need me so that we can do this together. It would be a more productive and constructive, more direct democracy. And it's important to have that because it leads us somewhere where we need to be. You know, away from where we are right now, where we're seeing, you know, this tritary function of government with three-branch system that has moved itself to pinnacle power into the executive branch that is now making decisions that are not based on anything reasonable in terms of the will of the people. It doesn't even make sense to, like, put America on the hook for all of that tremendous amount of money is going to have to be spent, thrown into the war machine, you know, to keep up with the consequences of, you know, the actions of poor decision making. And in the aftermath of this, you know, attack, there's going to be more that's going to have to come as a result. It's not like a, you know, one-time thing. And so that's going to draw on the pool of resources of Americans, and we're already so deeply in debt. And, you know, there's no light at the end of that tunnel whatsoever because, you know, Republican, you know, Congress and a Republican executive and a very Republican-skewed judicial system, like, we are in a position where the resources that are about common general welfare are being abandoned so that special interests for, you know, profiting corporations can get infused with that money. And then, you know, that's taken from the pool of everyday taxpayers while the richest among us are not having to pay any tax. And so it's creating deficits because, you know, you're not generating the motor of the economy in terms of, like, the middle class in small businesses hold up the entire economy. And those are disappearing, and so you're getting less revenues going in, but you're spending these higher dollar things, billions of dollars for AI data centers and, you know, making missions to go to the moon and, you know, all of these other things that are just like these big, you know, pie in the sky, high ideal things. But the basic bare necessities of everyday life are crumbling and shattering, and people are drowning, you know, and there's no lifelines there anymore. And now we're having to commit more of what we have very little of anyway. I mean, very little to actually grow more in debt. And instead of investing it into the people that can help to generate more revenue to help us draw down the debt, they want us to go even further into debt because a nation cannot grow in profit and revenue to draw down its deficit if it's in war. It can't. What it can do is feed the machine of war and increase the deficit in the meantime. And so instead of creating solutions of investing with return on investment that helps the people and grows our revenue base, you know, now we're being put on the hook for more war. And the war machine's going to make more money. and they're going to profit, and sure, there's going to be a little bit of a trickle effect in the areas to which those, companies that feed into the war machine, exist in. But in general, for the most part, I mean, industries are going to start to die, especially because, something I heard resonant in so many words by everybody in the UN today was like basically saying we trust America less and less, and the people that used to be our close allies are less and less inclined to align with us. And that's going to really start to, come out in terms of our economic opportunities are being shrunk on the global stage. And so that means we have less external markets, and the substance of the people internally have been shrunk. And so there's not a lot of, fluidity in our economy domestically. And there's a massive hoarding of resources by, these elite few. And it's a system that is set up to fail. And this war, is just one more thing that is going to make matters worse. And so I'm thinking of like, how are we going to be able to reconcile, cleanse the American reputation from this, negative outcome consequences of the spectacle that POTUS 47 and the MAGA government has created. How are we going to redeem the time for ourselves as Americans? How are we going to reconstitute ourselves as a people that is starting to rift and break and fall apart and created these factions and this disunity because of the actions of POTUS that is, not directly pointed at trying to divide us. In many ways he is, but every decision he makes is less and less about America, and about Americans, and more about himself and what he thinks is right and what he cares about and what matters to him most. And it's so self-centered, and deviates away from, things that actually matter to everybody else, that, we're being led intentionally into a failed state. And so I'm like, how do we recover from this? How do we restore, our unity with one another? How do we invite everybody into a welcoming situation we can thrive on? How can we all get on the same page? How can we determine what our, proper intended use of our government is supposed to be about helping to solve for the intractability of situations in terms of our, domestic order and, global order, and to find our place in such a way where, we're not the disciplinarian, but we can become once again an inspiration to the world. Like, how do we work towards those sorts of things? And I think about it more and more every day, and understanding, wanting to take this innovative, technological, advanced approach to government that isn't about, infusing a bunch of money into these high-tech companies and let the tech bros take over, because those people are about profits and deviation, and they lost the point of the exercise a long time ago in terms of do no evil. They threw that concept out the window. And they're not serving the collective best interest of everybody. They're oriented around profits, profiteering. And, and the government's been hijacked by those types of people, and those people, those profiteers, are in positions of government too. And so they're not looking about, protecting the people and the collective best interest. And so it's like, recognizing that the dysfunctions of the government as it is now really requires a wonderful countermeasure in the form of spontaneous cooperation of the people who are fed up and to create a movement of a force function to lead us forward in change that, likened to what they took on with the civil rights movement. It's like we're fed up and we're ready to move forward in a different direction, and we're going to get everybody to come along with us. But I think in such a way where, it can be less of a struggle and more about a success, a confidence that we build up in each other, in ourselves, and we work towards together. I want it to be a supportive movement that's good. And when I think about it, I keep referring and defaulting back to the concept of eudaimonia. And eudaimonia, essentially, in the simplest terms, means to be well. And the concept is derived from many sources, but one of the main ones is Eudemonian ethics, like Aristotle's ethics. And the whole idea is having a basis of how to help people to achieve the good life. And that is what's most natural. People are naturally drawn to that. They spontaneously go towards pleasure, enthusiastically. And if you add in the concept that movement towards pleasure is also about moving away from pain, so it's not an escapism, but rather it's a divergence away from the bad things into the good things, it can be most compelling. It can be something that we would all move forward towards together. And I'm trying to have a conversation to get people to see that potential in me to be a leader, to help us to take on this concept of eudaimonian politics, where we're taking an innovative approach to government. We're moving towards a more direct democracy. We're splitting our powers one more time. Evolution is constantly dividing. We need to move from this triangulation of power that can be pinnacled to a pillar of power that is structured and orderly and works with one another in concomitant, complementary, conciliatory ways. And it creates this safe space from which within it we can figure out ways that our politics works for ourselves, and people can be a part of the process of puzzling out that future together, informing the systems, helping us to gain perspective, to give your sensibilities to it, and your insights. Help us to, weed out the unlikely, options that could potentially cause harm. Help us to see, because we all have blind spots, these sorts of things, and work together, doing the good work of civics together. And to work towards a common purpose of stewardship gives us a way to focus ourselves on accomplishing something together. When I look at it this way, in terms of we can't change the fact that POTUS 47 made the decision to attack Iran and cause havoc and damage and things like that there. If starting tomorrow we could remove POTUS 47 and I would be president, this is, I know that there's no actual way that would work, but we're talking in a hypothetical scenario universe. If I was to be president tomorrow and I have to make decisions in the aftermath of what POTUS has already done, where would I move forward from here to set things right? And the first order of business would be to, ask for the American people to, be in a state of forgiving the mistake and accepting that there's work to now be done to set this right, and to be willing to take the responsibility of, not trying to waste our energy on pointing fingers and blaming, but working towards something that can be reconciliatory in this situation, which is where stewardship comes in. We could offer to the world, if we based our identity on becoming welfaring stewards, we can offer a healing balm of sorts to send to Iran in place for, the olive branch, sending to them saying, like, you know, maybe there was no other way, and, this is where we were taken, but where we want to go from here is in such a way where we can help you to build back up in a way that's, much better than what it was before. And we want to see you thrive and to succeed and work with us in a way that, we want to reconcile and to redeem this somehow. Help them to build back up, help them to build reinforcements, help them to break away from their sense of, like, all that they have is their might and their power and their capacity to retaliate. That instead it's like, use that frustration and the anger that you have, that we share with you, in a constructive way, and let's build a bridge together that can restore integrities between our nation and achieve an ends that is in mutual benefits and interests. Especially because I would see this as an opportunity to help to shift Iran away from its alignments with Russia, which would help to temper the ego of Russia so that it doesn't think that it can continuously get, too big for its britches and then become excitable in its sense that it wants to play empire with the world, and instead move into a direction of trying to draw their interest away from Russia and invite Iran into a situation that is welcoming. And this is not me being optimistically naive. I understand the complexities of the situation, but I also know that I listened to, the representative from Iran today speak at the UN and just say, like, this is not okay. And if there's at least one person that can reasonably agree on the fact that this was not okay, that there is something that we can do, leaning especially on the moderating influence of the UN, to be able to open a dialogue between, the nations to say, like, we want to make things right for you because we did wrong in this way. And then on the American side of things, it wouldn't be us going to play savior to some other nation or going over there and, investing our time, effort, and energy on making them great. No, it's about saying, this is the work we do. This is who we are in America. We set to work to help to make the world a better place. And in the process, we make things better for ourselves here. The way I see it is, this functions as like a 2-for-1 sort of thing. It's like, for every 2 lives in America that we enhance and level up, it's our obligation and our duty in terms of good humanity, and the fact that we want the world to be a just, fair, stable, reasonable, right, fair place of freedom for everyone, that we would have to extend, at least a portion of our good favor, our goodwill, and our prosperity to others, because that gives us more safety. There's safety in numbers. If everybody is content and everybody's happy and everybody's thriving and everybody's doing well, people are focusing less on, ways that they can, take from others and, do violence against others and conflict with others. And, we would help to be able to solve a lot of the violence that happens in nations because of the corruptibilities of the fact that systems are rigged out of the favor of people prospering. And so we can take it on ourselves to say, like, as we thrive, you thrive. And, because there's a lot of work to be done here in America for us to level up to a situation that everybody's thriving in. To get everybody up to the, criterion standard of living the good life is going to take a lot of work. But if we devote and we dedicate ourselves to say we're putting in the good work to build, the systems, build out the innovations, educations, infrastructures to help level up our lives. For every 2 projects that we focus on doing that here in America, we devote ourselves to one project to set things right in those places that we have done wrong and start making amends for it. Help these nations to be able to get back up on their feet. You know, we've spent so much time destabilizing Iraq and Afghanistan and Iran, and do something that is intended to help these people to be able to be restored to wholeness, and to take that on as a responsibility. And not such a way that we're playing savior, but rather we're working in mutual favors with one another. It's like, it is our best interest for you to succeed, because when you're at peace, that is the far greater peace for ourselves. Because then we don't have to worry about, you know, constantly looking over our backs. And it would be an act of goodwill and a gesture of kindness. And I think that it wouldn't have the exact immediate effect, because people are going to look at us like, oh, you're shady, you're shifty, like, you must want something, you know. America has a lot of work to repair our soft powers that were dissolved by POTUS 47 and his administration's disregard for the value that's there. But we can start to build those back up and build reinforcements and to restore our relations with other nations and other people. And so we don't have to be looked upon as, you know, this bad place. The world would be less hostile towards America if we become more hospitable, you know, and, you know, if we become, you know, good hosts for, you know, the world paradigm, and we become, you know, caring for others, and we can do it in such a way where, you know, we're putting ourselves in the position of, you know, like when you're on the airplane, they always say put your mask on first before you put on somebody else's, because, you know, if you run out of oxygen before you're able to get somebody else's on, you're going to be worthless to be able to help anybody else out. So, you know, secure your own mask and then go to help others. And, you know, that's the basic idea of, you know, putting America first. It's getting our own house in order. And we can't get our own house in order if we're, you know, our government's out there bombing other nations and committing ourselves to focusing there instead of here. There's so much that needs to be done and could be done and should be done, but isn't getting done, because that's the other problem about it, is that POTUS is in this position where he doesn't really have a lot of domestic power. POTUS is not really a domestic power, which is so weird to me. It's like, you're the representative of the people, right? You're the individual representing the individual person that is the individual citizen, you know? And power to the people, right? But you have no power to do the things that are necessary, you know, to improve the domestic situation. You always have to defer to Congress, you know. In a normal situation, of course, Trump isn't following any of the rules, you know, of that situation, but it's not like he's doing that to be like, this rule shouldn't apply because it's stupid, because it's preventing me from doing right by the American people. Instead, it's like, this rule's stupid, it shouldn't apply, it's preventing me from causing all this havoc. And that's wrong. But, you know, if we have this, you know, innovative approach to the civics branch that communicates with the American people, we would be able to work together with POTUS to say, you know, help us, you know, to guide like a helmsman, you know, at the helm of the ship, and you're guiding us and you're steering us, and you're communicating with, you know, the judicial branch, which is like the compass that's, you know, helping us to stay oriented with our sensibilities of law. You know, that's our, you know, our destination is to always be moving towards what is righteous, what is just, fair, reasonable, right. You know, and the judicial branch helps us to, you know, compass to understand where we're going, you know, and then the House of Representatives is like the sail that catches the winds of change, you know, so that we can use the force to help to propel us forward. And the Senate is like the right anchor of tradition that holds us steady so that, you know, we don't end up floating off aimlessly somewhere, but at the same time, able to make an emergency stop if need be, so you don't go crashing in somewhere. And then, the civics branch is all hands on deck. Everybody's there on the ready, to do whatever it takes. Everybody's got their role to play. Everybody belongs. Everybody's got a job. Everybody's got a purpose, a task. You matter. And then, the executive is at the helm, steering and reading the maps, which is like the Declaration of Independence, what we refuse to stand for, the Constitution, what America does stand for. And then, our varied laws that we've created over time that have given us the bearings of understanding, like, this is what we've decided for ourselves is where we want to be, and then POTUS gives the, drawing new outlines on the map to keep us, always going to where we want to achieve. And that those maps are informed by the designations of the people saying, this is what we want to be about. This is where we want to arrive. When we apply ourselves and we invest ourselves, this is where we want to end up. And I think that we have potential to do that if we're able to come together, diverge from this crazy concentration of power that has become corrupt, branch off to give us more space so that we can have better alignments and orientations that are less corruptible. And then create systems, for living and systems for, moderating and involving and communicating, and use those, communication channels to inform how we're going to move forward, and have, the executive and the judicial and Congress and the legislative and civics all to be able to communicate together to get on the same page. We will be able to move much faster because we'll be able to say, these are the decisions that are on the table. These are the facts of the matter. This is where we want to go. This is the outcome we're trying to engineer for. These are the capabilities of each individual branch. This is the human ingenuity, resource that we have to be able to apply to this. This is where our financial standing is, whether we can afford it or not. These are the terms and conditions of how we would have to be bound to do it. This is how it's executable. This is how it's enforceable. This is how we can prevent ourselves from not, going out of alignment with what is reasonable. This is how to account for, the variables in a scenario universe to, predict what might come to pass, and, watch out for, things that, maybe we should be on the lookout for, and move in a direction with intention together. And we can do all of that if we give ourselves the, structure and the order and the capacity to really mechanize government, to make it more operational, more functional, weed out those corruptions when they do happen, and create corrective mechanisms, when necessary, and to make us more of an involved situation that everybody is participating in. And I think that we would have less of the situations like we had today with POTUS making this, out of left field, power play to assert his dominance on the global stage, because it curries some favor to, his new buddies and friends that he's making in foreign nations who happen to have a personal interest in Iran's defeat, but not having the capabilities and, America's might to take care of that is beneficial. And Trump's benefits because they benefit, because they're, handshakes is dollars and backroom deals and everybody's back scratching. And it's all about, pledges and plays and putting the American people on the hook to do that. And that just should not be possible. And now that we're in this situation, we have to find a way to move forward. And I say it's just, bring everybody back home to, if we're focusing on America, we gotta start leveling up our life, because let's just face it, if war broke out and we're talking serious world war, Americans are not prepared to face those circumstances. Think of the good people of Ukraine who are holding it down and hunkering down and like getting through and making do with what they have. Life in some ways goes on, other places doesn't. And you know, I always refer back to my great grandparents. You know, my great grandpa was in the Second World War, and during that time, you know, my grandma went through this whole transformation of having to save everything and to see the value in everything. And I learned from her and from my grandfather what their experience was to live through a time of knowing the nation was at war and provisions were not, you know, in full abundance, and accessibilities were limited, and you know, people in the lower echelons of society to the middle echelons of society suffered greatly. And so you had to look at everything as having a continuum of value. You didn't throw anything away. I mean, that was the one thing I learned from my grandma, was to, you know, see anything that might appear to be trash as a treasure. There's some purpose to it that can be extended beyond, you know, the single use. And they were fortified people. They were resilient people. They knew how to stockpile and preserve and, you know, to cook full and hearty meals given, you know, limited resources. And they knew how to make do with what they had. They lived through a tremendous struggle in the human experience in the American situation. And they taught me so much, you know, listening to their stories and learning from them what it really does take to make it through when your nation is under a world war and the world is destabilized and resources are cut off, and you know, everybody's against each other and everybody's out for themselves. It's a terrible situation, and Americans now are so soft and you know, not able to, they're not ready for that. And then I look at the people who are playing machoisms, like, oh, it's cool, let's go to war, man, like, I like fighting, and you know, this sense of like it's going to be some sort of great thing to have conflict, because then you can justify walking around with, you know, automatic weapons down the middle of the street or something like that. And it's like, no, you don't want to be in that state. You don't want to be in a sense that, like, of uncertainty and instability and insecurity and fear, and, you know, wonder whether or not, you know, from one day to the next or 1 week to the next, things are going to be okay. Like, nobody wants to live in that situation. Nobody's ready or prepared to, you know, answer for the lifestyle that change that will be forced upon us if we are entered into a world war. America's not prepared for that. And I say, you know, if POTUS is out here, you know, making these big moves on the stage, you know, playing, you know, G.I. Joe with, you know, real human lives, because that's where his power is right now. He has more power to do that than affect change in the lives of Americans. And he obviously has no interest in improving the lives of Americans. Like, we need to do something to be responsive to that and responsible in the ways that he refuses to. You know, understand that he's putting us in a precarious situation where our options are limited and you know, more likely to move towards a greater world war, and we're not prepared for that. So we need to start preparing ourselves, not in a sense of like, you know, fear-based, you know, kind of orientation, but rather proactive, get our shit together. You know, we have to be ready for anything at all times, so that no matter what happens externally, you know, we got this, and to move forward in a way with intention that makes sure that we're not going to be you know, put in a precarious situation from a terrible decision from POTUS, and then all of the sudden, you know, we wake up the next morning and there's just this whole platter, you know, of shit that we have to now somehow digest. And we're left in a very terrible situation. I was so very disappointed, but again, my first thought was just like, listen to the trustworthy voices, understand what people are talking about. I listened to, my favorite news network, which is MS Now. I listened to various podcasts that I trust in that are good voices, and I listened to what they were saying. They're bringing in content from these other platforms that I don't associate with, but they're bringing in this relevant information, and they're just helping me to touch base with, this is the temperature check of where we're at. And I'm doing this in a way that's kind of like, putting myself in a position of being POTUS. I'm not going to be able to be out there, with everybody all of the time. I'm going to be in, as they call, the presidential bubble. So I'm going to have to be able to learn to, take in the voice of the people and make informed decisions based off of that. And so I'm trying to keep myself in that position so that I can orient within that as I reinforce the systems for distinction and discernment and exploration and discovery and these sorts of things, so that I have an informed discretion for my decision making when I create policies. As I write out this Eudaimonian political theorem that I plan to execute and act upon when I become POTUS, I'm taking in those insights from people now, with the intent to bring together brilliant, trustworthy engineers to help to build up the structures of it from the inside out of the role of president, so that it can be most effective and it can be fully integrated and a part of the nation. And then I'm working to see how it's possible to just pool the resource of the people in such a way where it's attuning my ears to listen to the voice of what they're saying, what they're asking for, what they need, but not internalize everything that they say. I'm just trying to find a way to help to inform systems and inform them. And so I'm listening to these trustworthy voices, and I'm so grateful for them because they brought reason and calm and expertise and conversation and the dialogue, so that I could see the connections between people's insights being shared with other people and their insights merging together, and then giving a higher order insight of okay, this is what can be done about it. This is the situation, here are the variables, how can they be combined? And I'm so grateful for that, because I don't have the capacity to reach people in those ways, and I'm only one person. I can't have conversations with everybody, but everybody can have conversations amongst each other. And then when I reach out to experience these trustworthy voices, they're giving me insights of their perspective, and their trustworthy voices. And so as they're giving me information, it's not them telling me what to think or telling me what to do, but they're just telling the story of who we are, where we are, when we are. And that information is relevant, and it's informing my decision making, and it's important. And I'm so grateful for having all of those voices to be able to constantly refer to and to continuously trust in, and to know that, they're listening and they care, and that's why I can trust them. And the fact that they're not trying to tell me, how to perceive things, because I have those mechanisms myself. I just need them to come from where they're coming from and share that information. And like I said, I'm keeping my touch on the pulse of trustworthy voices, but from all different walks of life. And I'm constantly building up more and more trusted voices. And I'm gaining, insights and resources from other external things, books and research, and, going back through all of my research that I've done, having communications and conversations with people in person, which are my favorite way. It's like the best way to ensure trust. If you can see somebody eye to eye and be in space with them, you can sense their vibe and you can know like really what they're about. And it's like the quickest, fastest way to rapport. But I've been taking in all of this stuff and like really just trying to understand how to follow up just a terrible presidency of POTUS 47 with something that can redeem the time, restore integrities, untangle the messiness that's been left behind, weed out the corruption, install corrective mechanisms, help restore trust in systems for people to trust in government again, to be a voice of confidence and reason for people, to role model good humanity, but to not come off as if I'm like superior high horse and I know all the answers, because I don't. I need you to give me answers. I'm just willing to be receptive, and to take it in so that, I'm making informed decisions. And I still make mistakes. I'm not a perfect person, but at least I'm devoted to, making amends always, to become my best version always, set things right always. And because that's, a driving force in me, I think that makes me like a really good person to entrust, to restore trust in the government, because I am just a citizen. I'm a regular, everyday person, that has just grown up in the American situation, and, it hasn't worked out for me. It hasn't worked out for a lot of people that I know. It has worked out for, some of the people that I know, but for the most part, I'm like the American that you look at that it's like, what went wrong kind of thing, like, America didn't work out for me in many different ways, and there's so many people that are like that, and not enough people like that have representation in government. And I think it would be compelling for somebody like me to take on that position, because it's like, I have the dedication, the devotion, and the want and the need and the drive, do whatever it takes sort of thing. But at the same time, it's like, I know where I come from, but I also know where I'm going. And my intent is to take everyone along with me so we can transcend this shitty situation and get into a much better one. And I really love America. Like, she disappoints me many times, this whole, debacle, waking up this morning and seeing POTUS make a terrible decision on behalf of Americans, and now we all gotta live in the consequences of it, like, hurts my heart. But I go into problem solving mode and try to set things right. And I'm working really hard at cultivating a capacity to be able to go into these intense situations of decision making and know that I'm solid and I know what matters, and that I have fidelity to my soul print alignment, and that I'm loyal to those things that I believe in full-heartedly, which is I believe in the United States of America, and I believe in the American people, and I believe in being leaders of the free world. But I also believe that it takes a lot of work to make that happen, and it's an unrelenting, ever continuum that we can never stop. We can't give up, or it's all lost, and we can't pretend like, oh, we've arrived, because you have to maintain a system even once you get it set. It has to be maintained, and we have to make sure that every generation remembers the importance of the why factor, why we do this, and understand the how factor, this is how we do it, but not be forced into conform with rigid traditions that people can't find best practices and break molds and take risks for higher things and aspire for greatness that is far more than what we can even fathom right now. But to also contain ourselves in a comfortable conservation of so we don't get so far ahead that, we are like a runaway train and we're going to fall off the edge of a cliff because the tracks haven't been created yet. We need to, temper and tempo and pace ourselves, but move forward with intention and drive and a sense that we need everybody to be able to come along with us, because we need as many people with us on our side as is possible. And then to recognize the value of, our domestic order and our global order. And, our desire should always be to want to default to a continuum of an imperishable world peace, and never allow ourselves to go astray into some situation where it's we're allowing bad actors with nefarious intent to make decisions on our behalf that we then have to live in the outcome consequences of, that limits our life experience and forces us to focus on bad, terrible, god-awful things, and we waste our time, effort, and energy arguing about how terrible it is, but we don't have the energy to focus on the things that are most constructive. So the present situation isn't great, hurts my heart. I'm praying for the world. I'm praying for all the souls that are lost, all the lives that are lost, and I pray for, the personal day of revelation for all these mindless radicals that are leading the world into war, to wake up, and for the graces to be there with them, to just remind them that, this is not the way. Coming back into the light. And with that, I'm grateful for your extremely valuable time, attention, and consideration. I hope that what I've said has given you a sense of the potential that is me, and the potential that is we, and the potential that is America if we work together, because everything that I want to achieve is for our collective best interest, but I can't do it alone. But we can do it if we do it together. We just have to choose. And I'm not interested in America as a nation that's mixed up and tossed up and constantly moving in different directions. I want us to all come together in a reasonable way that helps us just let go of the past and embrace wholeheartedly a future. And I care deeply about making sure that nobody gets left behind. And I really believe that dialogue is going to be the best way for us to compel people to come into the light from, all the extremes, and come more centered on, back to home, back to center. In that space where we can all belong together without, stepping on each other's toes or being too close, but close enough that we can be there for each other and extend helping hands where it's necessary. I hope that we can find a inclusive, peaceful, lasting resolution to this current predicament, and that we make sure that we assert our demands and requirements to have security, global security, and to make that not negotiable in terms of it must align with international law, and it must adhere to our domestic law as well. And that we are looking to creating an environment in which we can thrive and prosper together. And I pray for the opportunity for de-escalation of the situation, and I think that if we can remove the money variable from the decision making of POTUS, that especially in terms of his personal profiting, that the things that are happening in the global stage in terms of using the war machine to affect, different regions, we would see that not happen in such a dysfunctional way, because the incentive would no longer be there. I really do believe that POTUS 47 is acting off of his greedy personal self-interest, and that's why he's brought us into this conflict with Iran. And if POTUS was removed from the equation, that America would not be in this situation. And so it's his fault. But we're all complicit because we're Americans and we have the capacity to do something about this. And, we need to use all the levers of politics and government that we have, but we also need to use our roots and culture leverages, our personal connection leverages, our familial connections, and we need to start building up things that help to level us up, because I also believe that if the American situation was improved, that's one of the things that POTUS and MAGA uses against the American people. Everything's so crappy. That's why I do all these bad things, because I have to, because things are so bad. Well, if we start making things that are good, they no longer have that as a bargaining chip to manipulate people at the ballot boxes, or, to get them to, support them on social media to help them with their false narratives and things like that. Like, no, the lived experience of people will begin to improve by moving in a different direction away from him, and, despite him. And then as their situation improves and they evolve in this thing that's making their lives better, like, they'll begin to give more resistance to, the MAGA's intention to lead America in this very bad direction. There won't be energy to have momentum to take it that way, because we'll be coalescing around these different ideas that are much better for ourselves and each other and America as a whole. And, that'll win over hearts and minds at the ballot box. And, it's not just about fighting against something, it's fighting for something. But it's also not just about, fighting, the systems. It's like fighting our complacency and our, habits and our tendencies of sticking to the status quo and what we know, breaking away from those things too, waking up to the reality there are better options. You need to wake up one morning, decide to do things different. And that's where we're at in terms of, we have to take decisive action and take a movement that is, refraining from involving ourselves in the, complex world of divisiveness. Stop investing energy there and devote it somewhere else that, respects human rights and protects life and, is justifiable because it adheres to law. And, it's about saving lives, not imperiling them, and finding a way to somehow get people to be in mutual agreement that it doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, you matter. And the fact that we have so little time on this planet to work together to make something amazing happen that we can also reap the benefits from and enjoy, it is in our mutual best interest to invest in something constructive instead of destructive. So I'm going to continue to do my good work. I'm whittling down a couple of housekeeping things that I have to do in my personal life circumstance in order to afford the time to focus intentionally and most specifically towards this. Right now, I'm constantly being pulled away from doing this work by having to just pay to live. And that's again a part of the American struggle, isn't it? So I'm trying to solve out for those sorts of things. But fortunately, the best way to solve, problems for other people is to solve a problem for yourself. And then you understand, other people have a similar problem, and then all of a sudden you have this whole trend of how to be of service to people. So I'm working on that with intention while still, again, trying to orient myself in this position of, if I'm able to affect change from the position of POTUS, how might I do that while still keeping the common human touch with Americans, and then understanding and respecting, other nations, because we're all in this together. The whole world doesn't revolve around America. And certainly as POTUS, all of America wouldn't be revolving around me. Like, I would be referring to other people, like championing for your success and making sure you succeed, and make sure that you know that you're cared about and that you are being considered and you are relevant and you do matter. We're working towards making things better for you because it is in my interest to see you thrive, just as it's in your interest that I thrive. And this is a mutual interest, mutual benefits, mutual securities, mutual respects. And hopefully people can just get on the bandwagon of mutualisms, I see it instead of, political ideologies. It's something that we can all get in on together, because it doesn't make you give up who you are. It just enhances who you are, and then respects the fact that, the better you are aligned with your highest self and your best version, the better likely you're going to bring out the best in other people around you. And then it becomes this like wholly self-reinforcing awesome program of everybody just leveling up to achieve their best version. And that's what I'm aiming for. So with that, I'm grateful for your valuable time, attention, and consideration. Until next time, be well.